We are continuing this morning in a series that we started called First Five. And before we go any further, I would like to invite the 4 years old through 5th grade to make your way to the kids' church this morning. And there we go. They're heading back that way. Probably still working on the 10 Commandments. I don't know if you have any kids that have been back there, but they're learning those, and many of them have them memorized. Hey, a couple of things I just wanted to hit on before we get started with the sermon here. There is a men's breakfast next Saturday. That was already hit. Volleyball tournament next Saturday, and there's food. I think there's food in between the volleyball, in between church and the volleyball thing. There's food in between. There's food in between church and volleyball, so you can load up before calories to burn. And then here's another thing. The food pantry that is a part of our community here. There is a donation box that is out here in the lobby, and so we ask that you would be, if you're swinging through the grocery store, grab some food items, non-perishable, that we could put in that box, and then they're delivered to the food pantry. We appreciate that. And also, maybe you saw here that as a part of supporting Rock River Christian Camp, we do they call it the Pack the Pantry or something like that. And I think we are on the lemonade call. And if you look out there in the lobby, if you can buy one of those little containers of lemonade while you're out there and put that out there, and then the churches that support the camp kind of do these food gatherings points, and then that way the camp doesn't have to have those additional expenses. It's just kind of provided for them to be aware of that. And then finally, last week was our Faith Promise Week, and had a Faith Promise weekend, and we asked that if you are able to give, beyond your tithe, beyond however else you might give, and you just say, I believe that by faith, it's called a faith promise, by faith, somehow miraculously, God is going to bless us financially some way that He can do that we don't understand, and I believe that. And so by faith, I'm going to give this additional money to support the missions that the church supports. And so in your bulletin, there is a thing that's Faith Promise card. And so if you want to fill that out and you still want to participate in that, you can go ahead and drop those right in the offering box that's out there, and that will be added to the total of the Faith Promise. All right, I think those are all of the announcements, and that's never a good way to start a sermon because you're already half asleep. And so just kind of bump the person next to you and say, well, this is going to be better than last week for sure. And wait, no, that's not good because I didn't do anything last week. I shouldn't say. Okay, here we go. So let's review. Let's start with a review. That's always a great way to start a sermon too. We did Genesis. Remember we did Genesis. And Genesis, I think the next slide here kind of shows how Genesis is divided up into two different parts there. And there's chapters 1 through 11, and then there's chapters 12 through 50. And maybe you remember that first part was all about this kind of statement like this. God is a God of second chances. That's good news for us. God is a God of second chances. And remember, it starts with Adam and Eve, and they're in the Garden of Eden. He says, I'm giving you perfection. Just don't eat of that tree. And they did. And you would think, well, God would just say, no, I gave them everything, and they chose not to be with me, and they were done, right? But then there's Cain and Abel, and Abel wanted to please God, and Cain didn't. And then Cain wipes out the only guy that wants to please him, and then you would think God said, done. No. Remember, they have Seth. And Seth's generations are obedient to God up until they're not. And then God wipes everything out, but saves mankind through Noah and gives him another shot. And then mankind, just Noah. Noah knows God, but then his descendants, sure enough, they drift away. And then sort of the Tower of Babel. And then the next thing was, we saw that, so God tried with these mankind. And didn't go so well. So he said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with just one guy, Abraham. Remember? I'm going to go with Abraham. And so they sort of watched the story of Abraham, has Isaac, and has Jacob, and Jacob has Joseph. And God begins to work in a blood covenant with Abraham and begins to bless and prosper him right up until the time of Joseph. And then, or maybe you remember that Joseph believed in the covenant that he had made with his great-granddad and said that we are absolutely going to be given our own land, the nation of Israel. The Israelites were going to be given their own land, the land of milk and honey, the land of Canaan, which is ironically, right, nothing ironic about it, exactly where Israel is. And there are still people today trying to kick Israel out of that land that God said he would give to Abraham. It's the same piece of property. And we saw where we left off the book of Genesis, as maybe you remember, Joseph had become a dynamic leader in Egypt. And there was this famine, and so Joseph's family, all his dad and his brothers, they all traveled from the land of Canaan down to Egypt because there was a famine. And then Joseph made this statement to his brothers. He said, someday I'm going to die, and when I die, I want you to save my bones. And when God makes good on his promise that he made to great-granddad Abraham, someday when we're in that land, I want you to take my bones and bury them in the land that God promised to great-granddad. And maybe you remember, that's where Genesis sort of shuts down. Well, then what happens is the next book of the Bible is Exodus. And then Exodus kind of launches in from this place where all of the nation of Israel begins to thrive there in Egypt. And so Exodus. We're jumping into Exodus today. We're jumping into Exodus. And so biblically, what is the book of Exodus? Biblically, it's this. It's the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. Remember, God took Abraham, he took him outside, he says, Abraham, look up and see all the stars. You're going to have more descendants than there are stars in the sky. Count them, even if you can count them. You know, it's hyperbole. It's like, we know you can't count them, but that's how many you're going to have. And so I'm going to bless you with that, and I'm going to bless you by giving you a land. And so the Exodus biblically is the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. Historically, it's from bondage in Egypt. That's where the story will pick up today. They're enslaved. The nation of Israel is enslaved in Egypt. To freedom at Mount Sinai. They're going to make their way through the Red Sea into the wilderness. Moses is going to go on top of Mount Sinai, and then God is going to deliver to them the Old Testament law. The Old Testament law. Parties, terms, and promises. The terms of the contract, if you will. The Ten Commandments. The 613 laws, if you will. And so, chronologically, it's about 400 years. So, in a matter of moments, in a matter of about 6 verses, or 400 years fly by at the beginning. But historically, it's about a 400-year time span that Exodus covers on a timeline view. Geographically, here's a map. They're going to start over here in Egypt. And they're going to make their way through the Red Sea, down through the Red Sea, and up into, they're going to make their way out into the desert. They're not going to get to Canaan yet, but they're on their way there. And so we're going to watch that take place. Descriptively, Exodus. The book of Exodus is 2 Greek words put together. First is the word ex, like exit, E-X, exit. And then the odus simply means highway. That's highway. It's highway out. It's the highway out, is what the Exodus literally means. And so God is going to be taking the enslaved nation of Israel that is enslaved in Egypt, and they're held captive there, they're in bondage there, and he's going to take them out of that place, and that's Exodus, the highway out of that captivity. Thematically, it's God's redemption and covenant with his holy people. God's redemption. He's going to redeem them, and then he is going to make them his, if you will. And so here's how the book, if you kind of divide the book in half, here's kind of the themes of it, is that the book of Exodus, chapters 1 through 18, is I brought you out, I'm bringing you out of Egypt. It's the story of redemption. What does redemption mean? It means to be set free. It means you're saved. It means that you're not trapped anymore. You're not being held down anymore. You're not suppressed anymore. There's no one over you anymore. And I'm going to be taking you out. That's the first part. It's the story of redemption, being set free from Egypt, the nation of Israel. And then the second part of the book, which we'll cover next week, 19 through 40, is I'll make you mine. It's the story of covenant. And so he's going to free them from Israel. He's going to take them out into the wilderness, and he's going to enter into another covenant with them, and he's going to show them, this is how you're going to be my people, and this is how I'm going to be your God, and it's this story of dynamic relationship. And so that is the book of Exodus. That's the book of Exodus. And so we pick up the story. Joseph has made his way to prominence in Egypt, and he dies. And then one of the versions, I don't know if it's the New King James or the NIV, but the phrase is there in the first few verses of the book of Exodus, and it says, "And there came a Pharaoh that knew not Joseph." And so Joseph was a great leader for Egypt, but then generations go by, and it's like, who is that guy? We don't know who that guy is. And the native people, the leadership of Egypt is looking around going, these Israelites that are living in our land, they're growing in number and prosperity, and so we need to enslave them and put them to work for us, because if we don't, they're going to take over everything. And that's exactly what they did. For 400 years, the nation of Israel was enslaved in Egypt. Well, it's a story of redemption. It's the story of redemption. So, if you got your bulletin, write this down. Here we go. Redemption. Redemption. The story of redemption. It's the story of the nation of Israel being freed from Egypt. They're being freed from Egypt through the plagues. Maybe you remember watching the Ten Commandments and those images in your mind of the different plagues that God brings upon the nation. And so listen to this. Exodus chapter 6, verses 5 through 7. God is talking to Moses. And God says this to Moses. "I have heard the groaning of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians are enslaving. And I have remembered my covenant," blood covenant that he had made with Abraham, that he would give Abraham his own nation and his own land. And so, therefore, Moses, you go and tell the Israelites, and also you're going to be communicating to Pharaoh these things. "Therefore, say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them." And then listen to this. He says, it's prophetic. "And I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment." I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you up out from under the yoke of the Egyptians." And maybe you remember that the way that God does that was through all of the plagues. Remember, there was plague after plague after plague after plague after plague, and Moses would Moses would bring a plague from God to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh had experienced the plague, and he said, "No, you can't go." And he'd bring another. "Oh, yeah, maybe you can go." "Nope, you can't go." And plague after plague after plague after plague. And so here's a great question. Why didn't God just zap all of the Egyptians, make them go away, and then deliver them to their promised land? Why did God use these plagues as a redemption tool to bring them out of Egypt and into the promised land? Why did he do that? Why did he use those plagues? Well, God is very intentional. God, I've said this before, God reveals himself through history. Do you want to know who I am? God says, watch me. Pay attention to what I do. And you will learn who I am as I reveal myself through history. And so, why did God use these plagues to redeem? And because there was a lesson that he needed to teach the Egyptians, and there was a lesson, more importantly, that he needed to teach his people, the Israelites. You see, all of those plagues are symbolic. All of those plagues are symbolic. And you realize that the Egyptians were a polytheistic people, had many, many gods, many gods. And several of those gods, they were idolaters. They'd make a little statue of it, and they would set it up on the mantle of their fireplace or wherever, and in their home, have a little shrine, and they would pray to these little false gods, and they would think they were going to be receiving the blessings of God. One of the gods that the Egyptians had was literally the River Nile. The River Nile. And they said, the River Nile brings us water, and it brings us fish, it sustains our crops, it sustains us, it provides a food for us, and then God shows up and he says, you think that's a God? Watch this. And what's he do? Moses does what? Turns the Nile into blood. And he kills all of the fish, and he makes it undrinkable, and he says, you think that's a god? I'll show you who's a god. I'll show you who's a god. And he just wipes it all out. And then the Egyptians got to walk around and go, oh, we always thought that was a god. I guess that's not really a god, right? Oh, what's he do next, right? Plague after plague after plague. God after God after God. He removes them. And maybe you know that the Egyptians had a son, the sun god, and his name was Ra, and he was the highest powered god. And so what was one of the plagues? Complete and total darkness. Can't see your hand in front of your face. You pray that, and you've seen the Egyptians, the big bright sun that's sort of shining down on the person that's standing there at the cave. That was Ra. And they would pray to Ra. Say, thank you for providing the sun. God makes it completely dark. Says, you thought that was a god? Well, I'll show you who's God. I can turn the lights on, I can turn the lights off, and Ra can't. It's fake. It's made up. And so they had a god of frogs called Hecht. Hecht was a frog, and so they make a little frog and they put it up there and they pray to it. And what God sends so many frogs into the nation of Egypt that they can't take a step without crushing one of their gods. And he's just showing them, no, that's not a god. I'm God. That's not a god. And so he's bringing these one after another after another. And then he says, not only am I the God of all things, but the Israelites are my chosen people, and I'm going to show you how I divide them from the Egyptians and my chosen people. And he sends flies. He sends flies. And as you read through text, you realize that God sends the flies so thick that when they breathe, they're sucking in flies. And so thick in Egypt, but none were in the area where the Egyptians lived. And you've seen this before. You know, it's kind of like zzz, 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 right? And flies over here, no flies over here, and then God, he draws a line right through the sky and says, no flies are going there. And God is all powerful. He's all powerful. He says, these are my people. And then the people of the Egyptians, they would pray to Pharaoh. They thought Pharaoh was a god. Surely Pharaoh is a god, right? And so Pharaoh cannot be afflicted by any of these things because he is a god. And then God sends the death angel. And who does it affect? Everybody. Even Pharaoh. And so, one by one by one, God says, ding, that's not a god. Ding, that's not a god. Ding, that's not a god. And the whole nation of Israel is going, you know what they're doing? You see this? And Egypt's going, we thought these were gods. No, they're not. They're not gods. And he's just wiping them all out, one by one by one. And God reveals himself. And so, God redeems. He sets them free from Egypt through the plagues, wiping out false gods. Well, the story continues, and God does another redemption. There's another redemption story in the book of Exodus. And that's a redemption of being set free from destruction. The nation of Israel is going to be destroyed. He saves them from destruction through the Red Sea. Through the Red Sea. And so God makes them rich. It's an incredible story. Incredible story. Here we go. Exodus chapter 12, verses 33 to 34. The Egyptians urged the people to hurry and to leave the country. Now think about this. They've been experiencing these plagues upon them, and they're realizing none of our gods can stand up to their God. And so finally Pharaoh has said, yep, let them go and get them out of here. And so the Egyptians are looking that it's probably going to be a lot better for us if they all left, and probably in a hurry, right? And so the Egyptians urged the people, the nation of Israel, to hurry and leave the country. And then listen to this. For otherwise, they said, we will all die. The Israelites did, listen to this part, it's really good. The Israelites did as Moses instructed them. And so Moses went to the nation of Israel and said, what did he tell them? He says this, the Israelites did as Moses instructed them, and the Israelites asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and for clothing. And so we're leaving. And we're going to be making our way out there into the desert. And by the way, do you have any silver or gold that you would like for us to have? Yes, here, take it. Oh, go. Right? We've been enslaved for a long time. You guys are all able to shop at some of the finest clothing stores, and we're not able to shop there. Could we have your clothes? Yes, please, take them. Thank you. Okay? And it is an instantaneous transfer of wealth from being slaves in a rich nation to becoming the rich people in a slave nation. Boom. Listen to verse 35. The Lord had made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people, and they gave them what they asked for, so they plundered the Egyptians. Boom! God says, I'm going to make you a nation instantaneously a wealthy nation. And so they leave Egypt and they make their way out into the desert. They're leaving Egypt behind, making their way. But they make their way as far as the Red Sea. And they can't go any further because there is a sea in front of them. Meanwhile, Pharaoh wakes up and he realizes, holy cow, we had it pretty good when all of these people were slaves. We used to be rich. Now we're not rich. But we used to be able to do a lot of really cool stuff. What we should do is go and capture the nation of Israel and bring them back to us and make them work harder for us, and we'll enslave them again because we had it pretty good then. And so Pharaoh gets his whole army together and he begins to go after the nation of Israel as they have fled Egypt. But there's the Red Sea, and they turn around and they see the entire nation coming, Egypt coming towards them. And so what's God do? What's God do? And so they've got all of this with them and no place to go. And so you know what God does. You've seen the movie, right? You've seen the movie. And you know the story, right? And so Moses lifts, he stretches out his arm. Didn't he just say that's what he's going to do? Is that going to free? And so he has Moses stretch out his arm. He lifts up his staff, right? And water parts through. And listen, they went through, can you imagine how muddy and gooky the bottom of that would be? So God fixed that. Look at Exodus chapter 14, verse 29. But the Israelites went through the sea on... There's a hint on the board there. Dry ground. Went through on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. Exodus 14:30 says, the day the Lord saved Israel from, that day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians. Remember, they make their way through on dry ground, but then Pharaoh's army charges into the bed of the Red Sea after them, and then God says, it's probably time to close that up. Wipes out the whole army. Wipes them all out. Remember? It said, that day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw this, here's God revealing how powerful he is over and over and over. You are my chosen. You are my people. I'll take care of you. I will prosper you. You are mine. And he says, and when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, their God's servant. And what a powerful, powerful story of God saving and setting free and saving them from destruction through the Red Sea. It's a powerful story. But so here's the way that this story plays out, right? Enslaved, made super rich, set free. Yes, set free. Oh no, what's going to happen? God opens the back door. They slide through. Yay, water's closed. And now all of Egypt and all of their problems are clearly behind them on the far other side of the Red Sea. And so clearly there's no more problems in front of us except for the fact that we are super rich and have all of this wealth. And now we are in the desert. Everything that we want for lunch is back there. There's nothing to eat. There's nothing to drink, because now here they are, and they're looking at all these bags of gold, and they're going, it's heavy, I can't eat it, and I can't drink it, and so now what are we going to do? So, here we go. There's another redemption story. God sets them free. Write this down in your bulletin. God sets them free from the wilderness through God's provision. They're in the wilderness, but God is going to provide, right? And maybe you've read the book of Exodus 15 and 16, and you remember they get out into the desert there, and then they begin to grumble, Moses, there's nothing to drink here. God brought us here, but we're just going to die here in the desert, right? And they go out and they send out a search party, and they come across this body of water, but they discover that it's stagnant water. It's bitter water. It's no good. You can't drink out of it, right? And so then maybe you remember that it says, okay, here's what you get. God tells Moses, okay, what you need to do is take this piece of wood and go throw it into the water, and then everybody will be able to drink it. Oh, yeah, so how's that work? Right? You throw the piece of wood into the thing, and that's going to make it all better, right? That's not going to work. Of course that's not going to work, except for the fact that it worked. It worked, right? And so what was God saying? God was simply saying, I will provide for you. This seems impossible to everybody, and in your own eye, it doesn't make any sense. It made more sense if you would have taught us right then and there how to create a great filtering system. You know, this is God's plan for a filtering system. He didn't do that. So just throw the stick in there, and all of a sudden they all drink it, right? And so later on, they're traveling through the desert, and there's no water. And then the people say, God, we could really use a drink of water. And so God tells Moses, take your staff and go over and strike the rock, and then water comes out of the rock. Well, if God can create the heavens and the earth, if God can create DNA, if God is the creator of a rock, then God can make water come out of a rock. He's God. He's either a wimpy, puny God who can't do anything, or he's God and he can do anything. Right? He can do anything. And so God, he just says, strike the rock. And again, their eyes are opened up and they're like, this is really God. This is really God. And so they drink. They're kind of, but their stomachs are growling. They don't have anything to eat. So you read through Exodus 16. They say, we'd really like something to eat. And so what does God do? He provides manna from heaven. Manna from heaven. And while they're out there in the desert, God says, okay, I got a special recipe. It's really unique. It's my recipe. It's not your recipe. It's manna from heaven. And here's what you're going to do. When you wake, a nation of Israel, you're in the desert. When you wake up in the morning, go outside, and there's going to be manna on the ground. It's probably like a bread, like a sweet bread that's out on the ground. And then I want you to go outside, and I want you to collect enough food for you and your family to eat that day. Just that day. Because if you wake up the next morning and there's still some in the container, it's going to be rotten. And so they went out and they gathered it all up, and there's like, oh yeah, there's a little bit in there, maybe that'll be good for breakfast tomorrow. And so they set that down. And the next morning, and so they go out all day Monday and they gather it up, and then Tuesday morning they wake up and say, it's rotten, it's no good. Well, okay, so that means dump this out. Now, today's Tuesday, and so I just have to gather enough for this day, and then we'll leave some in there. And Wednesday morning, it's no good, it's no good. Okay, got to dump that out. And so Thursday, and then God says this, but on Friday, because Saturday is the Sabbath, the day of rest, on Friday when you go out, I want you to gather enough for today, and I want you to gather enough for tomorrow. God, that's not going to work, because every time we wake up the next day, it's always wrong. I said get enough on Friday, for all day Friday and all day Saturday, and so they say, okay, God, you're God. And then Saturday morning, they wake up, it's good, it's good, it's good. God's true, it's good. And so they could eat all day, and then they would start the thing over again. And so God supernaturally is providing for them. God reveals who he is. And he's communicating to them. I can take care of you. I'm looking after you. I want you to know something, that I'm a powerful God, and I can provide for you. And if you think your back's up against the wall, I can get you out from under that situation. If you think that I'm going to let you just kind of starve to death and rot out there, and that I've abandoned you, I'm not that kind of a God. I am with you. I'm for you. I'm interested in you. I want to be involved in your life, and I want to be close to you. And it's powerful, powerful, powerful God that is displayed in the book of Exodus. Powerful God displayed in the book of Exodus. Question. If God did all of that for them, can God, will God do any of that for me? Can he? Will he? Well, God proved that he can defeat fake gods. Right? Good thing we don't worship idols. Or do we? Do we ever enter into a time in our life where we think, I know what will make me happy. I know what will bring fulfillment in my life if I just had more money. Money is the key to happiness. Money is what will provide for me. Kind of like the River Nile. If I just had more of it flowing, then my life would be good and it would be right. Or is that a false god? If I advance a little further in my career, if I have more power, and at least I would be over that person. Right now they're my coworker, but I'd really like to be above them because then my life would be better if I was just one more step up. And do we ever look to things? Do we ever look to things to find contentment and fulfillment in our life? That is there that thing that you need to go to get a little kick of dopamine in order to And that's why people look at porn, because your life is just not complete unless you got that thing. That's why people are addicted to alcohol. That's really why people are addicted to cigarettes. That's why they're addicted to drugs. Because life without that thing, it's too hard. And even I've tried and I can't. And I've tried and I can't. But I know that if I had more money, then everything would just be a little bit better. If I'm just self-reliant, if I am the God, if I am self-reliant enough, then I'm going to be able to sort of trudge through all of these problems in my life, and I will arrive victorious. Maybe I'm the God. I don't know about that God, but I know me, and I trust me more than I trust that God. But God proves I'm the God that defeats false gods. And you do well to trust me. Wow. Can God do those things that he did then for us? God can destroy false gods. Question. Do you stress, fret, and plan, and worry about the future? Are you tempted to fix problems with shortcuts instead of trusting God to provide a way out? God specializes in providing ways out. John 10:10, the kids club kids had to learn this. The thief comes to kill and steal and destroy. And so it's the devil's job to say, you're trapped, sucker, and you're going nowhere, you're under my thumb, and you will do what I tell you to do. The second part of that verse, the thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy. But Jesus says, I have come that you may have life and have it to the full. I'm God. I'm in control. Do it my way. It's better for you. Let go of trying to come up with some shortcut plan, maybe a quick fix, or, my financial problems would be better if I cheat on my taxes, because then I'll know that I have X amount of dollars in the bank, and you come up with all kinds of schemes in your brain about how God doesn't know what he's talking about, but I can navigate this. God says, well, it might look like there's death on that side and death on that side, but I will provide a way out for you. I'm God. I can do that. Listen, God can give calm in your future. Finally, God can provide. The older that I get, that's really a weird and uncomfortable thing the more you think about the past and all of this stuff. But the vantage point from having some years behind you is that you get to look back and see things a little more clearly than you get to see them when you're in the middle of it. And my life is just this. First of all, my life's very similar to your life, and so I'm not trying to cast aspersions upon you, but I can look at my life and I can look back and I can say, my life is just this there's some really gross stuff in it, and there's some things that I'm embarrassed about, and there's those things that are in my life, but there's also in my life these things where I can kind of plot a course and say, in my life I can see where I didn't know where that was going to go. And I don't even know how I ended up here except for the fact that God was in that, and God was in that, and God was in it. And by the grace of God, here I am now. And God has been working in my life. And sometimes in the minute I don't feel it, I don't sense it, I don't see it. But when I look back, I just have to say, God has been providing for me and providing for me and providing for me. And so the best thing that you and me and we can do is to trust Him more. Trust Him more. Lean our life into Him. And say, God, I want to know you better. I want to be the person you want me to be. You provided for them in all these miraculous ways. And the reality is that when I give my life to you, you're doing the same thing for me. You really are. You really are. Which takes us here. I don't know where all of you are on your journey of faith and your relationship with Christ. But I know that God is good, and that He cares about you and He loves you. And that He sent His Son to die on the cross for you. And if you've never done what Bella did this morning and just went public and said, I want to give my life to Christ, and be baptized in the Christ, that's a conversation I would love to sit down and have with you. And maybe you did that a long time ago. And maybe sometimes it's hard to rekindle some of that you had when you were new in the faith. That doesn't mean that God's not still working, and that He is involved and watching, and He's calling you and wanting you to be close to Him and for us to live for Jesus. Amen? Let's pray. Father God, we just ask that you will call us into your presence, that you will help us to trust you, that we will share you with the people that we encounter in our life.